Is this one? Yeah.
All right.
Just checking. Yeah, so we have Sean LaRae Brinkley, who is going to present this morning, and a lot of you know her. You probably know that she's a marriage and family therapist, and she's a certified trauma recovery specialist, but she's also a certified life coach and a certified laughter yoga instructor. And if you don't know what that means, you can ask her afterward. She got you to laugh already.
Yes, yes.
She has her own practice, and she works at a therapy center in Woodland Hills as well. She is also teaches as adjunct faculty at Pacific Oaks College, and we are fortunate to have her here at San Fernando Valley Camp as the chair of the diversity committee and for her service on the outreach committee. Today she's going to help us understand and look at uncovering the myth of modern day slavery in our own backyard. So please welcome Sean LaRae Brinkley.
How's everybody? See, there we go. How's everybody doing? Good. I hope you're in a really good mood because this topic is not such a happy thing. I became interested in the topic of human sex trafficking. It has many names, which I'll get into more. When I was a therapist working at Optimus Youth Homes and Family Services, and for those of you who know me, that's when you met me. And I had a young woman come in, very angry, very uncooperative, and having none of me. And I was later told that she had a history of human sex trafficking and that her mother was a part of the whole thing. So I kind of had to, on my own, start to figure out ways to engage this young woman and work with her. And the experience of working with her just really touched my heart and brought this to the forefront of my, part of my purpose in the helping profession. So my title for the day, as you can see, is Your Clients Are Not Immune, Uncovering the Myth of Modern Day Slavery in Our Own Backyard. So I'll tell you a little bit about some of those myths as we go on today. So if you know me, you know I kind of like bells and whistles, so please forgive me for all of the flash and craziness that's going to happen as we go through this today. Okay, so CSEC, what is it? So it stands for Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children, sexual activity involving a child in exchange for something of value or promise thereof to the child or another person or persons. So in this horrific thing, the child is treated as a commercial and sexual object. And obviously we can agree that it is an act of violence against the children. So what does it mean in our therapeutic communities? It means that our clients are not exempt. We live in the San Fernando Valley, and much of the time everyone thinks this is an others problem and that it happens overseas and that it happens in bad areas and all of that kind of thing. It is true, it does, but it also happens right here in these United States and right here in our own communities and neighborhoods, even if they don't look like it might be this kind of thing going on in the neighborhoods. Trust you and believe it truly that this stuff is happening. So these children are not bad girls, but they're victims. And that's also something that much of the time, people, maybe not so much therapists, but the lay community believes that these are bad girls and they're getting what they deserve and, ooh, they're so nasty and all of that kind of thing. But as clinicians, we know that as youth, as young girls, they can't make a decision to participate in any sexual act, let alone an exploitative one. So prostitution is no longer what it used to be. So sex trafficking under the Federal Trafficking Victims Protection Act is the recruiting, enticing, harboring, transporting, providing, obtaining, advertising, maintaining, patronizing, or soliciting a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act when that commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, coercion, or in which the person's induced to perform such an act has not yet attained the age of 18. And the reason that this is so important is because this law has only been in existence since 2000. So young girls, even up until just a few years ago, were being prosecuted for being exploited. And the people who were exploiting them and the men who were participating in this crime were going free. So domestic minor sex trafficking is much of the same, but it also includes strip clubs, erotic massage parlors, pornography, escort services, and peep shows. And most states, in most state laws, minors involved in commercial sex trafficking are victims. So that's the good thing that we can understand now. So prostitution of a minor by a trafficker or a pimp. If you purchase commercial sex acts, this is all what domestic minor sex trafficking includes. Now, domestic minor sex trafficking is the same as CSAC. It's commercial sexual exploitation of children. But as we evolve in the processes of working with children who are sexually exploited, the language changes. So just to know that human sex trafficking, commercial sexual exploitation of children, and DMST, domestic minor sex trafficking, are all pretty much the same thing. Now, I was kind of shocked as I went through this because it talks about prostitution. And so for such a long time, when I first started in this work, I was very much against using that word as it relates to the children. But what I understand now is that it is not calling the child a prostitute or saying that the child is a prostitute, but the act of purchasing sex is prostitution. So that's kind of, I want to clarify that because that was a big clarifier for me and helping me to understand that it's okay to use that word, because I was like, no, you can't use that word. But in understanding that it's not calling the child, it's just the act of sexual business. Street prostitution, again, escort services, and a really big part of this is internet facilitated prostitution and pornography, where the child is sold, rented, provided something of value to perform sexual acts on camera, a video. And that is a way that many children end up involved in sex trafficking and not knowing, and their parents not even considering that that's what it is. They're being trafficked, even though this is happening on the internet. A lot of happening on the internet. So sex trafficking is not reserved for the third world countries or disadvantaged inner city youth only. Everyone is involved in this now. There's so many factors that we think about when we think about sex trafficking, and usually people think that it is children who are in foster care, from broken homes, and all of that, and that is true. But what we're learning is that it doesn't discriminate. This crime is happening against all races, genders. Boys are also trafficked. These predators go after people with vulnerabilities, and every child is vulnerable, as we all know. So sex trafficking is best fought through education. So that's why I talk so much about it. But as clinicians, it's important for us to educate our parents so that they know how to work with their kids. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today too. So some of this I've talked about, but the phone sex lines is a thing that we often don't think about. But those 800 numbers are still around, and every child has a phone. And so, whereas they work them much better than their parents, they can get involved in this without their parents knowing, and some of the time they don't even know, and they think it's harmless, right? Because we all know about the frontal lobe and how that doesn't develop until it's much too late for this kind of thing. So another huge and and horrible consideration is interfamilial pimping. And that happens when parents maybe says to the child, we're late on the rent this month, and so I'm going to need you to sleep with Uncle so-and-so to help mommy out. This is all real stuff. So to consider that is just beyond, but it happens. So how do they get these children to do this? They threaten them, coercion, force, abduction, deception, and fraud. It's a huge abuse of power, and they give them payments or gifts. Now, mind you, the payments are very small because this, in the United States, the I guess we could call it restitution, that the pimps make is pretty big. So in the United States, 100,000 to 300,000 youth are at risk of commercial sexual exploitation. And the average entry into this is 11 years old for boys, 11 to 13, and for girls it's 12 to 14 years old. So these are just babies. Every 26 seconds, a child runs away. Can you believe that? So if we count to 26, some child is running away from their parents, and they are even more vulnerable. When the girls that I worked with at the group home, many of them had run away because of things that were going on in their homes. But in just 48 hours of leaving home and becoming homeless, a child will be approached by a pimp. So who is vulnerable to this? Like, what are some of the indicators of trafficking and exploitation? So, history of emotional or sexual abuse. We know that if you see physical signs of physical abuse or sexually transmitted diseases, running away or being currently a runaway, having gifts and things that you know that your child can't afford. So if your child comes home with a Gucci bag and you didn't give them Gucci money, then there's a problem. And these are things that we need to teach our parents to be on the lookout for, because many times our parents want to give their children, material things, but kids will still want more and more and more. And so you always know what you've purchased for your child, and we know that most of them don't have jobs. So it's up to us to be paying attention to see, what items they have and ask questions. How did you get that? The presence of an older boyfriend or girlfriend, because women are pimps as well. Drug addiction. And now when we talk about withdrawal or lack of interest, what's the thing that we think about most is depression. So considering that our teenage children are often depressed, our preteens are depressed, so now there's something else that we have to be looking for when we consider that a child is depressed, to kind of get to the root of that. And of course, gang involvement. Now the gangs have, human sex trafficking has surpassed weapons trade, because the gang members have discovered that when you have drugs, you sell the drugs and they're gone. But they consider that the girls or humans are recyclable. So just think about that for a moment. It's harsh, right? So here's a 411, what every parent needs to know about sex trafficking. So as I mentioned before, it's big business, and yearly profits in excess of $150 billion a year for the traffickers. I read something else that said that recently some pimps are bringing in $2 million. And the cost is onto the victims. They pay in the trauma and the PTSD that they have, and the poor self-esteem and shame, guilt, which causes dissociation, spiritual ambiguity. So the targeted I call these the 3 T's. Targeted, the pimps seek the vulnerable youth with unmet emotional, physical, and spiritual needs. They employ the grooming process, which is an investment of time, money, gifts to break down the resistance, and traumatize. They use psychological manipulations, causing the child to believe that they care for them, that they love them, that they're the boyfriend. So who's at risk? So I want to point out that we talk about, again, the foster care system, single parent households, and lower socioeconomic status. But in these days and times, affluent families break up, affluent children become depressed, and affluent children are on the internet. And so really want to point that this problem has spread like peanut butter, and we really have to be aware of what is really happening out there. So raise your hand if you know a child who never walks to school or to the store. Do you know a child that doesn't own or have access to a computer? Mm-mm. How many little girls want to be in love? Mm-hmm. Okay. You know any teenagers that feel insecure? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Okay. Does anybody have a teenager that says, "You just don't understand me"? I'm looking at you, Doris, but I don't know. Does your daughter say that? She's kind of beyond teenage. Anybody ever had a fight with their child? Okay. And you just don't love me. I am almost an adult. I should be able to come in when I want to and go where I want to and call who I want to. And they test boundaries and take risks. I know I did. I certainly did. And I look up every day and say, woo, thank you for all the bullets that I dodged and for growing up 100 years ago when it wasn't quite this bad. So parents need to be aware of social media because there's some guy sitting in his house looking at little girls. Now, I'm not talking about pornography either. I'm talking about he's on Facebook. So let's talk about Nicole. She was 17 years old when her mom went to prison for a white-collar crime. So she met a man on Facebook, and he said, "Oh, I'll take care of you." And so instead of looking after her, though, he sold Nikki to men across the United States, from Texas to Washington, D.C. And I'm sure he told her, "Oh, we'll travel the world." It was only when she was in her early 20s, after being badly injured in a vicious rape, that she was finally able to escape sex work. Now, if her mom was prosecuted for a white-collar crime, then she possibly had a decent socioeconomic status. So social media can give pimps easy access to your children because they're always watching, they're listening, they will friend them, they'll see what they're doing. They know how they're feeling for the day because, let's face it, adults do it too. "Oh, today was such a horrible day, I can't even believe it." So we tell the entire world that. And so do our children. And so these pimps are watching because they want to find their way in. And so they'll become friends with your children. They'll become friends with your relatives. And how many kids will just see a friend request, don't care who it is, they just click on it. Why? Because they want to be popular. They want to have a ton of thousands and thousands of likes and of friends on their page. I know a little girl who's trying to be a social media, an Instagram influencer. So I asked her, who are all those people? Do you know those people? "Oh no, I don't know them. I don't care. I just need to have them on my page so I can up my numbers." So, has anybody ever heard of the Backstage? So in New York, there's something called the Backstage. That was a paper that if you were an actor or an actress, you would go there to find jobs. Not that thing. This is where they would put pictures of young girls, and men would go on the internet and purchase them. They could do everything on the internet, including pay with their credit card. Well, the federal government, they just got shut down by the feds, like not the FBI. But there are over 600 of these sites that are still up and running well. Traffickers reach these kids via Instagram, Facebook. Who's ever heard of Kik? You know about Kik? Tagged. Now I gotta tell you a little truth here. I was on Tagged about, 10, 15 years ago. I wasn't married to that guy then. And I kept getting these horrible messages from people. So I immediately shut that down. I thought it was gone. But kids are on it now. And Twitter. WhatsApp and Snapchat are on the rise. Now, I have a client whose daughter went missing, 17 years old. This is about a month now that she's been gone. True story. And her mother received somehow some video that came from Snapchat of her daughter with 2 grown-up men. And then, on Snapchat, they don't stay. So it's gone. Poof. She's still not back, but she did call her mother and she told her she's not ready to come home yet. She's having fun. So, from what I know, that's possibly the honeymoon stage. So the myth and the madness, ripped from the headlines. Growing number of children groomed to film own sexual abuse. Can you believe this? So they're live streaming themselves, and these are affluent white girls in their own homes. And this comes from the Internet Watch Foundation. So thank goodness there's something like that out there. Now here's the really sad piece. The profiles are a contrast to what is considered the typical sexually exploited child. Again, we go back to the foster care and runaways and all of this. But these girls who are at home, 2,082 images and videos of live streamed child sex abuse identified in a 3-month period. 96% girls, 98% were 13 years old or younger, with most of them, 69%, between the ages of 11 and 13. And this broke my heart. Almost 3 in 10, 28% were under 10, and the youngest victim was 3 years old. How does this happen? So this is the Mythbuster alert. Who's at risk? All youth and young adults. Now what does a pimp look like? Remember you used to see this guy? And he's clean to the bone, as my mother would have said. So here's the thing. Remember Huggy Bear? A lot of times pimps used to look like Huggy Bear. Some of you might not know, but what is that show?
Starsky and Hutch.
There you go. Oh, of course, Doug, you would know. Starsky and Hutch. So pimps, that's what they used to look like. They used to have the great big platform shoes, the big hat cocked to the side. Well, now this is what they look like. These 2 little boys ran a prostitution ring out of their mother's home, right? So they were arrested for something else, and while in custody, they sent a message to their brother to keep the business going. And the police found out, and the mother was prosecuted as well. I think those 2 are, I think they were 16.
17.
Oh, there you go, thank you. You can see this. Oh, there they are. Yes, okay. And this little girl. Now her grandmother says that she never would. But I'm gonna tell you why this is so scary, because what the pimps will also do is they will recruit little girls and have the little girls recruit their friends. At the group home, just before I got there, thank goodness, there was a little girl that came in. It's a 6-bed group home. She came in and she recruited 4 of the other girls. The one that they left they didn't like. And she was crying. And what they do is my boyfriend will get your nails done, he'll get your hair done, he'll buy you things. And from what I learned is that this girl was set up to commit a small crime, shoplifting, so that she could get in. So these girls were prosecuted or accused of pimping other girls. So the grooming process. Ashley was 14 years old when she met him. At the time, she thought he cared about her and loved her. She had opened up and told him things that she rarely spoke to other people about, how her mother didn't understand her, how her father had abandoned them years earlier. He bought her gifts, told her she was beautiful. She fell in love. But when he promised that he could fulfill her dreams, and she left her life behind to be with him, everything changed. So the phases of grooming. The scouting phase begins with the initial contact of the bonding, looking for the vulnerabilities, because they take their time. This grooming process is not overnight, because sadly, they are really good at what they do. So the manipulation phase is when they're building trust, and they pretend to be the boyfriend, false love, shower them with gifts, compliments, and promises. It gets them to the trapping phase, where they establish dependency, manipulate, exploit. We need cash, so you can do me this favor just this once. Sleep with my buddy. And then it goes on from there. So these are the profiles of pimps. So you can imagine the gorilla pimp. Now he's the one that does no courting. He doesn't set up, he doesn't groom. He's the one that has the van that pulls up next to the girls on their way to school and just grabs them and snatches them up and puts them in the van. That's the gorilla pimp. And he is continuously violent and aggressive. The Romeo pimp is the boyfriend. The CEO pimp is a businessman. He may be in a suit and tie. He may have on Stacey Adams shoes. And he might say, oh, I have a modeling agency. And you'll see a video in a moment about a girl who was involved in such a thing. The peer pimp we've talked about, the mama pimp, we mentioned her, and the neighborhood pimp, the boys in the hood. And those are some of the gangbangers or some of the neighborhood kids that some of the gangbangers might recruit, not always even to be in the gang, but to be runners, where they go and either get the girls, love up on the girls and bring them to my buddy's house, or they tell them where the girls are. And then the gorilla pimp goes and does the work. So why don't they leave once they get there? They're in captivity, they're confined, they don't have freedom. And they blame themselves. And they're not often left alone. And they develop a kind of dependency. So they keep them isolated. They don't have, access to a phone or anything like that. Uh-oh, I'm gonna ring the cowbell. They're afraid. And some of them don't have any identification because maybe they were just running down to the store when they got kidnapped or something. So, and then there's a debt bondage. They will tell them, well, okay, I'll let you go, but you have to pay me back my money. The thing is they really never see any money. And then why once they leave, because some of them actually make it out. And they are arrested maybe, but they go back. They don't trust law enforcement. Law enforcement sometimes, and this happened to one of the girls that I worked with, told them that if you have sex with me, this is a police officer, I won't arrest you. Only they did anyway. So they don't believe anything, and they've already been filled with false promises. And there's always the attachment to the trafficker. Trauma bonding, Stockholm Syndrome, we all know about that. And feelings of attachment to the life, the game. There's an identity disturbance because then they lose sight of who they are or who they were before they entered into the game, as they call it. And also, you got to remember that some of them actually believe that it's a choice, that they actually chose to do this. And some of them are seeking excitement and all this other stuff. But that's what it's like in the beginning for some of them. But then it ends up being more horrific than words can express. I'm sorry, you know, I told you I like the bells and whistles. So what does a survivor look like? So there's a woman, her name is Rachel Thomas. I'm going to show you a short video, I think. I'm not going to panic because it takes a minute. So I'll give you a little bit about Rachel's background. She currently is the, maybe that's it. Uh-oh, no, that wasn't it. She's the CEO and founder of an organization called the SOARS Education Group. And she founded this group because she was trafficked. But I want you to see her. Come on. Don't give up, Sean Lorraine. It worked at home.
No, it doesn't look like it's there.
Oh, because it's not that.
Technical difficulty, bear with me just a moment.
We're therapists, we understand.